Welcome to the Working Fans Podcast pay-per-view review. We are talking WWF In Your House Final Four today. And this is all brought to you by Game Up Hard Hydration. It's like your favorite seltzer, your favorite sports drink. Got together, had a baby. Dave loves it so much. He's going to give you the rundown.
That's right. It's 4 great flavors. We're talking fruit punch, orange, lemon, lime, and grape. And guys, it's a full flavor drink, only 110 calories. That's 110 calories per can. And it's just a low carb. Enjoy yourself some Game Up. And hey, why don't you enjoy this review we're about to do?
I got to tell you, but before we even get into it, as I almost always start, I'm going to ask Dave how he came to pick this. But I've been loving the 90s WWF because it's really what I remember growing up watching, even though if I go back for anything old school, it's always like mid-80s Crockett or like early 80s WWF before the change. This just brings me back to a time frame. So how'd you come to pick Final Four?
I just got on this time period because of when Sid passed away. Because when Psycho Sid passed away, I went back and I looked up a couple In Your Houses before this international incident where he was involved in a 6-man tag. And then I just started watching the In Your Houses because they were such an easy watch around this time period. And I don't know what it was recently. It could have been even on the McMahon documentary, but Austin talks about it, how we had a better show at one point. And, you know, they were kicking our ass referring to WCW, and there was good reason. They had the upper hand and they should have. But at one point, we turned the corner and we had a better show, but we couldn't get people still to watch us. And I feel like this is kind of that era. I'm not saying it was better than whatever was going on in WCW, but this is where they really started to kick ass with a lot of stuff here.
It is all over this show. But once again, talking about great wrestlers in the opener, Mark Marrow and Leif Cassidy. It's funny, at that time period, I don't think this match would have excited me at all.
No.
But I was doing some stuff as I got in from work, put that on, and I instantly stopped and had to watch the match because I remember what I said from last week, just realizing that Mark Marrow was way better in the ring than a lot of WWF wrestlers. And then having talked to Al Snow a couple times, or the podcast having talked to Al Snow, hearing how he is about wrestling and then knowing how good he is, this was such a great opening.
Yeah, and Jim Ross was great on commentary for this because unfortunately for Al Snow, he had that Leif Cassidy gimmick, which was kind of a more silly gimmick, but at the same time, he had really good wrestling. And, you know, I think Marty Jannetty might have just left or there was an issue with Marty around this time. And, you know, Al still got this Leif Cassidy gimmick, but he's using like submission holds, and you have, you know, Jim Ross putting over, this is a great ground-based attack. And then Al's occasionally mixing in some aerial stuff. And he really was just a great technical wrestler that could kind of do it all. But he just didn't have the right gimmick at that time. He's going to later go on to ECW in the next year. And that's when he's going to discover Head. And that whole thing is going to take off and come back. But right here, he was just a good wrestler with a silly gimmick, having a great match with Mark Marrow. And Marrow wins again with that shooting star press, I believe. Was it the shooting star or 450?
I believe it was the shooting star press.
I believe it was a shooting star, yeah. And that just shows you, too, like Marrow was quite the athlete for this time period.
Yeah, Sable coming into her own around this time, too. That was my favorite thing of this pay-per-view. WWE In Your House Final Four presented by Western Union. Yeah. The fastest way to send and receive money. And like Jerry Lawler even plugs it at one time. And I'm like, people still use Western Union, but I don't know if it's the fastest way anymore.
Definitely not now.
But after the match, you hear Honky Tonk Man's music. He comes to the ring, and then they go into the replay of Sean relinquishing the belt from Lowell. One, I've been to that Lowell auditorium many times, seen Ring of Honor there, seen a bunch of different shows. I still can't, I've seen NXT there. Can't fathom WWE Raw being there. And then my second question, what happened to Honky? What was he doing out there? They never come back to that.
It's so funny because I've watched a couple of these In Your Houses, and Honky Tonk is coming up on one with Rockabilly, was Billy Gunn's character. And I thought that was this one for a minute. And I'm like, oh. And then I noticed there was no Honky. And I said, I must have just thought I heard that. My bad. So it's not until now when you just read that, I'm like, oh no, that was Honky Tonk Man's music. So I had
the same thought. I heard it out of nowhere, and I'm like, all right, we're getting a Rockabilly match. Like, I don't remember Rockabilly a ton, so let's go back and see that. And then you see Honky get in the ring, and then they cut right to Thirsty Raw Thursday, and then they go from that video with Shawn relinquishing the belt to Kevin Kelly backstage with Psycho Sid, reminding me why Sid was so great in WWF, even when he wasn't wrestling. Like, not the best interviews, but they were always gonna be entertaining.
Intensity.
Yeah, and then we go from that interview to possibly the weirdest match on the show, and it might make sense, like, if you were watching around that time, but I didn't hear anything about a tag match. So when I first wrote it down, I've got Flash Funk versus Bart Gunn versus Goldust. And then I see the Nation of Domination come out, and I'm like, what is going on here? I realize it's a 6-man tag, and I'm like, how did they put this together?
They had little videos showing where they cost Bart Gunn a match against Farouk, and there were different parts where the Nation kept interfering in matches. So that's how the 6-man match was but it was still a very random 6-man match. So a couple interesting things here I wanted to point out. So the Nation of Domination is Farouk, Crush, and Savio Vega at this point. You got Clarence Mason, but to me, one of the true gold. I can see the smile on your face too. I'm going to go to this. JC Ice and Wolfie D, who are
first thing in my notes.
Yeah, they're wrapping him to the ring. They're coming through the crowd, by the way, which I thought was kind of cool. And it's just like, I can't do it, but basically it's like, we are the Nation of Domination. And then it gets to the thing like, hit your knees and start praying. Farouk is I don't remember, but it's gold. Check it out. But one thing I picked up on,
Jerry Lawler running them down too is great. He's running down Goldust gimmick and saying that doesn't fly in his neighborhood, and then like making fun of JC Ice and Wolfie D, saying he knows where they're from, and it was just great. All considering it was in Tennessee too.
That was funny because Lawler. You took the words out of my mouth, because Lawler was a bad guy and he kind of bashed all the good guys. But then when JC Ice and Wolfie D came out, he goes, I know these punks. They're from the other side of the tracks. And I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? But around that time period, probably on Memphis Wrestling, Lawler was probably feuding with these guys.
I want to see how many other things in our notes match up, because there's one thing later on between Farouk and Flash Funk that I feel like is going to be on both our lists. But this match started off hot. After I got over how weird the tag team combination was, I thought the match itself was amazing.
So I watched this show about a month ago, and in preparation of this show, I watched it again while I was on the road. I was listening to it. And some matches. So I don't have what I think you have in your notes, but there's a thing where Farouk has Flash Funk down, and he's gonna jump on him, and Flash puts his knees up, and JR makes a comment. Farouk, somebody saying bass, Farouk saying tenor. But before that,
where Jerry Lawler goes, now he's gonna call himself Farouk.
But did Farouk say something? Did he talk some trash to Flash Funk while he was down?
Oh, are you talking about the third part in my notes where Farouk calls Flash Funk a Southern black redneck?
I did not. I had a feeling it was something like that, because Farouk was notorious for saying stuff like this around that time. And you would have picked up on that. I'm like, I don't remember this match, but that sounds about right. And I even know the spot. I just didn't go back to listen to it.
Yeah, it was 100%. Flash Funk was face down on the mat. It looks like he's about to jump in the air and kind of slam his lower back with, Farouk's ass, that spot. But he slaps him in the head and calls him that. And it was funny because I thought that might have fit more when the Nation of Domination had more black members. I'm like, all right, so right now the Nation of Domination is a militant black dude, a white dude that used to be in jail, a Puerto Rican guy that they talked into it, their lawyer, and then 2 white rappers. And when you think about what it becomes, you're like, it's wild, because we're going to talk about it. We talked about it last week, how on this event, I thought Stone Cold felt more like the Stone Cold I remember. And it's my notes from his interview backstage with Doc Hendricks after this. But this is one gimmick, and I didn't even think about it till you just said it, that it doesn't feel like the Nation has fully come into itself yet.
No, and this Nation's going to dissolve because it's a few months later. I think Ahmed Johnson beats all 3 of them in a night, and they have to disband. And I think it's because of mistakes, Crush and Savio are fighting. And I want to say there's a Raw that comes up several months down the road. I was at. That's how I remember this, where Farouk fired a lot of the members. And that's when D'Lo Brown was kind of in the background, but he wasn't really like a member, but they say his name once in a while. And like he had already fired Farouk. Farouk had already fired Vega and Crush. I just remember saying something to Savio about down in Puerto Rico and those hot jalapeno peppers. You should be used to it because your ass is fired. There was this, then he got to like, it got down to D'Lo and Clarence, and D'Lo's just holding his head down like he knows he's about to be fired. And he's like talking about, we got to get rid of some more dead weight, one more dead weight. And then he's like, D'Lo, hold the ropes open for Clarence. And Clarence, get to stepping. And you just see D'Lo shaking his head. And he's so happy. And I'm like, anyway, I went off the track. But yeah, so this nation is not the nation you're going to know. This nation is going to change in the next probably 2 months, I would say.
And that's one of the biggest things right there. Even though you feel like you went off on a tangent, it's remembering stuff from that time and talking about that. Because, you know, we talk so much current wrestling that sometimes it's those memories of what we watched in the past. That's awesome.
Nation gets the win here, by the way, if anyone's interested.
And Triple H in the next match versus Rocky Maivia for the Intercontinental Championship. This one was wild because just looking at the name, Rocky Maivia isn't quite The Rock yet, so that still feels like a character in progress. And Triple H feels more like the Triple H now, even though it's gonna change significantly. So much different than the last event we saw.
So one little thing too, right before this, you talked about Stone Cold being the Stone Cold of old too. Yeah, he definitely. They had a little pre-match interview here with Michael Hayes / Doc Hendricks, where Stone Cold basically, Hayes had made a comment, you know, that you don't have a win over any of these guys in a main event setting, and Austin draws him back. He's like, I suppose the Royal Rumble wasn't a main event where I threw all 3 of those pieces of trash out the top rope. It's great stuff, and it kind of just, again, it's something throughout this show with this particular main event. We're going to get 4 individual interviews with each of these guys. As for this match with Rocky Maivia and Triple H, I love what Joe's talking about being Rocky Maivia. That was one of the things that really stuck out to me. This is like the beginning of what we're about to see here, and things are going to change. And in the meantime, this is coming off that Lowell, Massachusetts Raw card, which is famous for Shawn Michaels losing his smile, which we'll address a little bit later on. But this was also Rocky Maivia winning his first singles championship. He won it with a small package over Triple H. And because of that, a few days later, now he's defending that Intercontinental title against Triple H. And to me, this match, other than that itself, wasn't that memorable. What was more interesting was, and I think we're going to talk about, is Goldust coming back at the end of this. And Goldust is a distraction for Triple H. This leads to Rocky Maivia getting the roll up. He gets to win. He gets out of dodge. Triple H wants to get Goldust in the ring. He's calling him out. Marlena's off to the side. And then suddenly, Marlena's getting choked out. And as JR said, is that a woman? I think that's a woman.
Yeah.
The late, great Chyna making her debut at this In Your House. That was the first time we ever saw Chyna.
He questions that it's a woman twice, but I think once refers to her as a man. You know, because it was like, is that a woman? Oh, that could be a man. And then it's like, I think it's a woman. And it was just funny, the back and forth. It's blowing me away watching these old shows, because it's like, to think that you're seeing the debut of this person that you know was a huge part of wrestling for all that time.
Yeah.
It's just wild going back and watching that. And, you know, knowing that it's going to get so much bigger between her and Triple H. It's what makes the show fun. After this, we go to another one of those interviews you're talking about, Kevin Kelly backstage with Vader. Another thing, I didn't remember Vader being with Paul Bearer around this time.
Oh, yeah. Vader and Paul Bearer and Mankind were definitely an act together for a little while. And it did feel a little out of place for me. Like when you go back and watch it, I'm so used to Vader with his WCWs with Harley Race as that thing. And Harley, and this is nothing away from Paul Bearer, who was great at what he did. And you can go back ways and you can see like Percy Pringle. But, you know, Vader had a serious manager, a former world champion. And so just to see him with Paul Bearer, who's like, oh, my Vader. It's just like, oh, man, it just seems like, but Vader almost makes me laugh too. And I don't know if it was intentional, but he's just in that Vader mode, and he's in the, you know, sticking his facing the camera, and he's like, oh, Vader time. But he's just got this look on his face. It's very ridiculous to me, even though Vader was still very much an ass kicker at this time. And I know Vader's going to go unfortunately, this is probably towards more the end of his career we're getting out of. But this is still Vader a little bit at the height of his career. And honestly, we'll get into it later, but he made that Final Four match for me in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah. The next match in the ring, though, is two people I didn't remember wrestling when I was younger, but as I've gone on in time, I've heard a lot about Doug Furnas and Philip LaFon. They took on British Bulldog and Owen for the WWF Tag Team Championships. And this was a great match in a time when tag team wrestling wasn't necessarily valued for the WWF.
No, they were trying to rebuild. They were definitely a rebuilding phase. Owen and Davey did a lot of the heavy lifting in this era with certain tag teams. But just feels like a Jim Ross hire. Like he got Phil LaFon and Doug Furnas. I'm almost sure probably their jobs here for a little bit because Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon were a team that could really hang with Davey and Owen. And I want to say Phil LaFon's name in Japan would have been like Dan Crawford or something like that at one time.
Yeah, I believe it was.
Yeah, I remember reading about them in like wrestling magazines before they ever made his debut. And I remember Doug Furnas from a Clash of the Champions where he showed up one time in WCW. And I thought, wow, this guy is something else because he was so strong, but he was like so quick, and he had a drop kick, and he was something else. And we never really saw more of him in WCW. And I was like, where did this guy go? And then I read him in the magazines in Japan, and then he showed up here, and they had a great match. I believe they won. They won by disqualification because there was this bickering between Owen and Davey. Davey at one point has enough of Owen and just clotheslines him, and it looks like Owen's about to be pinned, but Davey still makes the save. Davey's about to pin either first or the final. I don't remember the power slam, but then Owen hits the other member with his slammy. They get DQ'd, and Davey's mad because it was a disqualification. Owen's like, we still got the titles. And that's all going to lead to about a month or two down the road on a Raw where Davey and Owen, are going to be battling, and Bret Hart finally is a heel, convinces them not to fight and convinces them that it's been WWE and all these American people that have turned us on each other over the years. And that'll be a great angle coming up. But yeah, I enjoyed this match a lot. I mean, four great wrestlers.
Yes. And then this led to Doc Hendricks backstage with the Undertaker. And do you know why WWF decided to make Michael Hayes Doc Hendricks? Because Michael Hayes was great on the mic, a great talker. And then they put him in this interview role where he doesn't do a ton of talking.
He was doing a lot of stuff to promote like live events around this time. Like if you had the syndicated shows, he'd be like on the Slam Jam, they'd call it, even on Raw. And so he'd be talking about things, and he'd do that radio style voice he was known for doing back then. Doc Hendricks too. Take me back here, Joe. You're more of a music guy than I am. Hendricks is Jimi Hendrix, but Doc Stevenson? Late night?
I don't know where the Doc came from.
Yeah. It had something to do with music, though. That's what they did. They basically took Doc something or other and Jimi Hendrix, thus Doc Hendricks. I don't know. That make no damn sense to me why it could be Michael Hayes, but this was Vince McMahon in this era where, he wanted to definitely control everything. And I know he wanted to make sure that he didn't want a freebird in his company at that time.
Yeah, but you got to hear from the Undertaker before this match. 90s Undertaker.
About this interview too, Taker says that he's found his dark side again, but he says it's not quite there, but it will be. And that's bad luck. He said soon the creature, I don't know how he worded it, but the Grim Reaper basically of the early 90s that dominated the World Wrestling Federation will be back. And that's bad news for everybody in this match. And I thought that was interesting because, in a match, you normally want to kind of put yourself over and build yourself up. To me, he was kind of saying, I'm not quite where I was yet, but we're getting there.
After that, you got the Royal Rumble recap, kind of setting up this match. And then you got the main event on the show. It's been what's been great about these shows because next week we got Halloween Havoc 97. Yeah. Let the people know how long that show is.
That's about 2 hours and 55 minutes as opposed to the hour and 40 something minutes, I believe this was.
Yeah, this match was hitting the ring about hour 17. And I was ready for it because now it's like when you got a late show and you're going to have a big main event, sometimes you're burnt out. Sometimes you're a little you get a little fatigued. But with this, I was ready to see Vader, Stone Cold, Undertaker, Bret Hart. I didn't remember who ended up winning it. So yeah. I'm going into it going, excited for any of these guys. And during this match, Vader bled a lot.
He did. So one of the, even before this four-way too, I was when they interviewed Bret Hart for the fourth interview, all the other guys are out in the ring already, And Jim Ross refers to him as the legendary Bret Hart, and they go back. And, Bret says, I'm taking nothing away from these guys, putting everybody over. But, tonight's my night. And I thought it was a real great way of building up Bret in particular for this match. We're all a lot of new generation, but Bret's kind of like that senior member now. And he's the veteran, but he's a veteran that can still go. He's the legendary Bret Hart. And I like that, especially since he was about to be the one who won. And I thought it made a lot of sense. But Vader, yes, let's get to that. Vader bleeding a lot. So this match is kicking off. You can win by pinfall submission or getting thrown over the top rope. And there's a spot where Undertaker basically kicks a chair into Vader's face, and Vader's eye just gets busted open the hard way. And he is bleeding all over this match. And they are fighting all across the arena. And it kind of gave me like Brody vibes, just that era where Brody and Abdul fighting in there and there's blood everywhere. And that's not something I really think about normally with this era of WWF.
No, and it really made it feel like a pro wrestling spectacle. I mean, it wouldn't have been out of place in a Vader match anywhere else. And I guess it is that weird thing of to me, it just looked like it belonged. But then when you think about what WWF was at that time, trying to be so family friendly, you would see blood from time to time, but not often.
They were interchanging. They were changing, but there were still characters like Flash Funk, Leaf Cassidy, and then like I said, at the end of this, we got blood squirting out of Vader's eye, and this match is just going on. In the end, Bret Hart wins, last eliminated Undertaker, and it's just chaos. And I like that they're setting up the next night on Raw. This is Bret's 4th title reign, by the way. And Sid comes out because that's the big match that was supposed to happen. And Sid was not able to get his title shot, so he got it the following week after the winner of this became champion. And Bret is only going to be champion for a day. This is his shortest reign. The next night will be a cage match on Raw. Sid wins. I can't remember if Austin got involved or what the deal was, but this is the infamous match, Joe, you might remember, where after it's all said and done, Vince McMahon walks in and to Bret and he says, I know you must be frustrated. And Bret shoves him on his ass. Frustrated isn't the goddamn word for it. This is bullshit. And, nobody was talking like that around that time period. I think USA Network might not have been too happy, but it was a memorable time nonetheless.
Yeah, so that was another great pay-per-view show review here. Halloween Havoc 97 next week.
If you haven't tried Game Up, then you are missing out. Imagine your favorite seltzer and your favorite sports drink had a baby, but it's way better than that. Each can is 110 calories, low carb, 4.9 ABV. It's a nice light drink that is not light on flavor. Game Up comes in fruit punch, orange, lemon, lime, and grape. Pick it up at drinkgameup.com or at your nearest liquor store.